My name is Lauren Hujak. I hate this picture. It's like the most airbrushed photo. I think it looks nothing like me, and I won't subject you to that anymore. That's it. I'm an 8-year employee at Google. I've spent the last 4 dealing primarily with Chrome and Chrome OS. And today we're going to be talking about enterprise identity management and these Chrome devices. I know that's a very riveting topic for most of you, so try to contain yourselves, please. I understand it's going to be very exciting. So if we look at enterprise identity management the way it is today, there's a number of things to consider. And if you're sitting here in this room right now, we're going to start off with a few assumptions. I'm going to assume that if you're here, you already have some notion of what Chrome devices are and how they might apply to your enterprise. Maybe you even have some in your own personal life. And we further understand that the benefits that extend to the end user of Chrome devices also extend to that of business, right? They're extremely secure, they're very affordable, and management of these devices, while robust, is pretty straightforward and simple. So as we start to move into the realm of the cloud worker from the knowledge worker, right, where people are doing all of their work in a mobile environment, they're using a lot of SaaS applications or web and back-end web type of applications, Chrome OS is an ideal platform to support this. The challenge is, for most people or most enterprises, not everybody is using G Suite. Now, we would love it if everybody was, but the reality of the situation is that not everybody is there yet. So the question is, how can you implement Chrome OS devices in your environment, avail yourself of the benefits you could derive from the Chrome devices, like security and shareability and cost effectiveness, and at the same time, leverage the existing investment that you have in any enterprise application that you made, particularly as it resides around enterprise management. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So depending upon where you are in your path to cloud adoption, many organizations, maybe even your own, are still reliant on some degree of legacy enterprise infrastructure to maintain certain key aspects. And one of the most difficult ones to migrate to the cloud is that of enterprise and security management. And oftentimes these are handled by an on-premise type of provider. In most cases, for many enterprises, it's Active Directory. And so what we've been striving to do is integrate Chrome devices directly with that, so that regardless of where you are in your adoption to the cloud, you can leverage a Chrome device and still use the existing infrastructure or application that you guys have already purchased or have made investments in. So if we look at a typical enterprise today, we find that there's a number of services that they're using. They're using things like SAP or VMware or Citrix. They're using a number of Microsoft Office products. They may be using EMMs like AirWatch, those types of things. All of these things interact with the identity management infrastructure on the back end, which more often than not is back-ended by Active Directory. Chrome devices also integrate directly with that. And we can use these devices to access all of this same infrastructure without disrupting this back-end identity management component on this end. So in addition to Google Identity, which should be no surprise, Chrome OS supports other identity options. And the first of those is Microsoft Active Directory integration. Now this can be either native ADFS or some of the recent new developments that we've created, like Active Directory or Azure AD. You can also do federation through ADFS, SAML SSO. And we have a third option that we call public session, which is no identity at all. We'll explain what that means in a little bit here. So we'll start with Active Directory. Active Directory allows us to do 3 very important things. The first is we can join devices natively to Active Directory. We can create a device ID inside of Active Directory, and they can be managed within. That also means that we can enable users to log into those devices with their native Active Directory credentials, which is great because they no longer have to go through a broker. And then the combination of these 2 things allows us to push policies via GPOs on both a user and a device level. And of course, this is very appealing because now we've eliminated the need to synchronize back to the Google Cloud. And all this stuff can be managed directly within your Active Directory environment, which most people have made an investment in, have expertise in, and are comfortable working in. So if we look at how this is implemented, there's a 3-step process to get this in place. The first is you need to activate your Chrome management license by enrolling the device with Google Enterprise, this indicates that this machine is now under management and it's ready to receive policies. It's no longer a consumer-grade device. From that point on, everything is communicated directly from Active Directory. So the device will be joined to the domain, and when a user logs in, they're going to be using their native Active Directory credentials. And then the combination of these two things allows us to push these GPO policies via MDX templates that you can download from our Google Help site. There is also the Google Play Store aspect to consider. So the Google Play Store, if you're familiar with this, allows people to download all the Android apps that they want and run them on their Chrome devices. The challenge with this is that the Google Play Store requires a Google account to access those applications. And if you're logging in with your native Active Directory credentials, that account doesn't exist. So this has the potential to be a sticking point for many organizations who are looking to do that, which is why, as part of the new integrations, we've enabled a methodology for people to be able to provide this access to their end users, even if they decide to log in via that manner. So if we take a step back and look at the way things are done now with the new integrations versus the way that they were traditionally done, we've gone much farther than just federated access, which is what the traditional or the original implementation of this was. So the devices were joined to Google, and they were enrolled directly within our backend cloud. All of the certs, all of the policies were pushed from that administration console. The Active Directory server also had to synchronize with the Google Cloud. So Google ended up being the sort of choke point for all of this. It was the go-between. And this new model moves beyond federation, allows us to not only join the devices natively to Active Directory, but also allows users to communicate directly with that after the fact. So Google is no longer this sort of choke point to all of these aspects. We can push the policies, we can push the objects, both the user policies and the device policies. They're all interacting and reside directly in Active Directory. So we've removed this sort of middleman type of scenario and passed the savings on to you, the consumer. In addition to this, there's other aspects that are very critical for people to use these devices in a Microsoft environment. We have a number of organizations that are using certificates in some capacity, and so certificate enrollment is another one of the implementations that we've made as part of the new integrations. Now, this is accomplished through a three-step process. The first is the administrator of the device installs this app and configures the policies for this app. What this means is that when the user logs into the device, this app is force installed, fires up, and requests of the user to sign in for a certificate. That certificate is then sent to ACDS, which sends a signature request through ACDS to provide not only a device ID, but provide the certificate back to the end user. And then that identity is used to create a profile on the device itself. Network file shares is something else that a lot of users need and find it maybe even impossible to do their work in a Windows environment without access to their files on their backend, much like a Windows network file share. So one of the implementations that we've built is an extension that operates in much the same capacity as network drives. Administrator would install this extension, install this app, user would log in, and they would be able to connect to their network drives, much like the native Windows environment. Now, if anybody's used this before, admittedly, it was a little clanky in parts, and it had the propensity to stumble if it was used at an enterprise level grade where people were using very, very large files and needed something that was much more robust than a typical end user type of environment. That's why there's a brand new implementation of this that's being built from scratch that's included natively as part of the OS. So you no longer have to install this and manage it via configuration policies, but it also provides a much more robust experience for the end user. So if this is something that is appealing to you, be looking for it in GA in 1 or 2 releases coming out very, very soon. So let's talk about what we've covered so far and look at some of the other new integrations that are aspects of this. So we talked about the ability to join a device natively to Active Directory. It also creates an identity directly within Active Directory, and you can manage it within that interface. We've also talked about users joining in with their native Active Directory credentials on devices that have been domain joined. And then we talked about the ability to push GPOs to those devices to govern the behavior of the machines directly from Active Directory. Again, those live in the Active Directory server. We also built in the ability to support Kerberos. So users who are logging into their devices can use Kerberos tickets to access on-premise or services that require this for authentication for access. And NTLM-v2, even though it's not as secure as Kerberos, is a requirement that a lot of organizations has asked for as a fallback, and it's something that wasn't previously available but now is as part of the new integrations. And then the Google Play Store, as we just talked about, right? We've overcome the hurdle that was present when people were trying to log in with their Active Directory credentials and access those applications to run them on their Chrome devices. So we have a quick demonstration here to see how this plays out in the user environment. This is going to demonstrate the Active Directory user authentication. So here we see the end user is logging in with their credentials that are not Google credentials, but I'm sorry, they're Google credentials, not their Active Directory credentials. And then, of course, they'll provide their password when challenged. And so now it's prompting the user to join this device to the domain. So the credentials that they're going to use in this environment, after they identify the machine, this person types slower than I do. So see, they're using their native Active Directory credentials. This is not the Google profile that they're using. And once they enter their password, it's actively going to join the device to the domain. Indicate as such, successfully enrolled. Now it's available for enterprise management. The second implementation that we talked about in terms of management is through a federation. Federation is a really appealing concept because it allows us to support this hybrid model, wherein we can have some of our services that are accessed natively with our Active Directory, and some which are cloud-based services that are using the identity that's provided initially by that Active Directory or backend, but are accessed via some third-party or identity provider. And so ADFS is Microsoft's federation via SAML. They use this to create a trust relationship between two different realms. The realm that's internal to the organization, and then some external source that you're going to be accessing, that your users are going to be using for all their SaaS applications. So if we look at how this plays out in the real world, at least in terms of how most organizations utilize this, we have our workforce community up here with their users and their devices. And on this end, we have all of the SaaS applications that they're typically using. On this other end, we have our identity provider. This is your Oktas, your Ping, what have you. And of course, these are all being fed by some identity management piece. In most cases, it's Active Directory, which in turn is fed by some other HR system. But this is how the structure typically works out. Now, this is really nice because what it allows you to do is completely offload all of the identity management piece from your on-premise systems. So if we walk through how this works out with the end user we'll say is trying to access Salesforce. I'll pick this because it's the easiest for me to reach here. So this user is trying to access Salesforce. When they go to Salesforce, Salesforce says, well, I don't know who you are. I can't let just the riffraff in here. You need to prove to me that you have access to this. So it'll redirect them to that identity provider, at which point it challenges them for their credentials, user ID, password. Again, that stuff is fed via their backend directory server or identity server. And then once they log in, they get redirected back here and says, oh, okay, you have provided an assertion that this user is, in fact, who they say they are, and they do have access to this backend implementation. Now, this is really great because you can use that same assertion to access all these other SaaS implementations. So what we did with Chrome is implement it as another one of those federated endpoints. So when a user logs into the device, it'll say, well, I don't know who you are. Redirect back to the SAML authentic or your IDP for your SAML token. It'll say, oh, okay. You're authorized, here's your assertion, and it'll use that assertion to create a user profile on the device itself in exactly the same way as if you'd use your native Google credentials or your Active Directory credentials. The way to set this up, if you're interested, is 2 steps. So the first, we use something called Google Cloud Directory Sync. And this is a tool that organizations can use to help replicate or sync their user on-premise identity to that in the cloud. So we use this tool, they'll take their identities, and now we have a copy of those in the cloud. And the sync indicates that this is going to be kept synchronized. So if somebody makes a change here, it'll be propagated out to the cloud. Now it doesn't change this. This remains the single source of truth. Its sole job is to propagate that information back out to this federated endpoint here. The second is when somebody actually goes to log into the device. So somebody will go to the Chrome OS login, it'll redirect them to that identity provider and say, give me the assertion to show who you are, which goes to this point, at which point it gets routed back through ADFS to the Chrome device itself, to Google Cloud, to complete the enrollment process. And so we can actually look at how this plays out for the end user here. So in this demonstration, we see that it's managed right there. We have a Google account that's managing this device. And when we log in, we're going to use our Google identity. Immediately, instead of going to that native Chrome login screen, it's redirected us to our ADFS login screen. Now, the credentials that I add here are the ones that are provided back-ended by that Active Directory and ultimately propagated out to that identity provider. I log into the device. It redirects me back to Chrome, and now I've started my Chrome session. And if we look at the policies for this device, we'll see that it is indeed managed, but you can see that they come from the cloud and not a native Active Directory management. So if we look at the source of all of these management policies that are coming down, you'll see it's cloud, 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 cloud. So not only have we created a profile on the device, but we're also pushing those policies to manage the device as well. And lastly, the one I spoke about earlier was public sessions, right? This is the absence of an identity to authenticate to a device, which might beg the question in many of your minds, you know, hold on here. How can the absence of an identity actually constitute an identity? Which is a really good question. So if we look at an environment where we have situations where a number of people might be using the same device, we might have a degree of turnover. This would be something like akin to a hotel lobby where multiple people are using the device, maybe requiring an identity to authenticate to a back-end SaaS application, but not necessarily the device itself. This is really useful if we have situations where a number of workers are using the same machine. We want to make sure that we wipe everything off of the device before the next user logs into it. And they might need a credential to access some back-end application, but not over and over and over again. And they're plenty comfortable in providing just a single instance of a user ID and password to access that back-end implementation. And so this is really desirable in those types of environments where we want to provide a machine that we can govern via policies, so all the policies can be pushed from the back-end administration piece, but we don't necessarily want to make people log into the device itself. So if we want to see how this plays out for the end user, this interface is slightly different. So we have a pod that's presented to this user that normally would have that icon of the individual person themselves and prompts them for their access. Then we get to this that indicates, yes, it's being managed by a public session, and then there's some policy configurations that are being applied to this device. Of course, I go ahead and click the terms of service that you can apply. Nobody reads them like everybody else on Earth. And then if we go to the policies, we'll see that they're also a governed machine. Now, the other thing that's different about this experience, in addition to the fact that our battery is almost dead, you'll see down here we have this red exit session button. So what this allows people to do is say at any time, instead of logging out of my Gmail and logging out of Salesforce and logging out of Facebook and all those other things, I can simply end the session and it terminates that. It also has policies that you can push here that will say, even as an administrator, I don't care how long you're on this device, I can set a timeout policy for this. So after 30 minutes, after an hour or something, I want to end this session for the end user. So in this case, we have no identity to the device itself, but we have the ability to access backend applications which are requiring somebody's credentials. So the question is, if this is something that you'd like to apply, which of these types of scenarios makes the most sense for your organization? If you are still leveraging a lot of on-premise solutions, if your path to the cloud isn't quite in the cards yet, that's okay. In those situations, you're going to want to be leveraging the native Microsoft Active Directory type of integrations. These are the on-premise identities that we want to broker. We can even manage the machines with their native identities directly within that interface. If you're starting to move to the cloud, if you're leveraging a number of SaaS applications, if you don't want your users to log in again and again and again and provide an SSO type of environment, then look at the federated model that we have available to you. And then, of course, if you have a situation where you have a number of users, nurses' workstations, production, assembly lines, those types of things, where multiple people are rolling on and off a device, access to the machine itself isn't actually necessary as much as the back-end access to the SaaS application. Then you can look at implementing a managed public session. Now realize that this isn't mutually exclusive with the other ones. You can have multiple types of configurations set up in your environment. So just because you find this appealing, but you say, well, we have a large degree of users that wouldn't apply to, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use this public session mode here. And so what I want to do now is bring up my friend Sean, who is kind of in the thick of the middle of these things. Humana is in a position where they're implementing Chrome devices and are kind of wrestling with this identity management. It's a crisis of identity, if you will. So what they're trying to do is help figure out, is this something we're going to use via native Active Directory? Should we move to ADFS? Should we move to Azure AD? And this is something that I think a lot of customers are wrestling with. And when you try and implement a new factor like, hey, let's manage these Chrome devices, it can provide a, sort of onerous and Byzantine type of architecture to try and wrestle with. And so if Sean would come up here and join me, we're going to have a little Q&A of completely uncontrived questions that we haven't rehearsed in advance and gone over and discussed about how Humana is implementing this. So, Sean, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know it was a big trip for you from the East Coast, so thank you, genuinely, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit first about Humana. I feel like it's a name that a lot of people might recognize, but don't know specifically what you guys do and how big you guys actually are.
So we're an insurance company. I think we're the 4th largest insurance company in the country. The last numbers, Fortune 100, soon to be Fortune 50, I think. So good, right?
Nice job.
Good for us, right? Stock price is super high right now, so that's great. So we have roughly 45,000 employees, thereabouts. Mostly a Windows-based shop with some Mac and then also some Chrome built in at the end. So what we're doing at Humana is something that you mentioned right at the end, and that's the reason we started with Chrome at Humana, was public sessions. So we had a need, there was a government requirement that we provide people in our guidance centers, these places where our customers come to do different things, that we provide them a method for accessing email or accessing the internet or something like that, and we did not have a good method of doing that. So we figured out, Chromebooks, these look like a great idea. Can we manage them as well as provide this service? And certainly with the public session, that's exactly how we started it.
So talk to me a little bit through your discovery journey of how you came to arrive at Chrome devices. I'm assuming it wasn't just as simple, as amazing as everybody says it is. Like, wow, these are fantastic. We can go in and roll them out and
yeah, sure. So
no fuss. But what was it really like for you?
Well, we have these other devices. They're called iGels, and wasn't a good user experience. We use them internally for our users as sort of loaner type situations, and so the thought process was once again, like, is there a way like we could do something else, a good, better user experience for us? And so Chromebooks came to the forefront. They're lightweight. They have the ability to do the public sessions, like we mentioned. We can manage them easily. We didn't have to necessarily keep track of them as closely as we did our other devices, and so that's how we ended up at Chrome.
So I know you're still kind of early in your process. You know, 45,000 people. You don't have 45,000 Chromebooks.
True.
Yet.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll work that. What's the feedback been like so far?
It's been pretty amazing. So at Humana, we had sort of a philosophy change in the way that we're doing things, meaning that with our traditional Windows laptops, we secure them, lock down as tight as we can get them. Because we are an insurance company, so we protect user data. It's the utmost of our importance. So, so what we've done though with Chromebooks is, and this sort of came from our phone situation when we use cell phones at our office, we dialed it back. So what we do is we don't manage the Chromebooks. We manage them from the admin console, but we don't lock them down with a bunch of policy.
So, like you mentioned, as an insurance company, that seems to fly in the face. I mean, you're highly regulated, highly scrutinized. Why don't you lock these devices down more securely than...
We're all under an NDA here, right?
Everybody here is signed an NDA.
Right. So what we do is, with our Chromebooks, we allow the user to use whatever they want to do on a Chromebook, very much like we do our own phone, our corporate cell phones. But we we only allow them to have access to the information, our Humana information, via Citrix or via a VM
So you're
session.
using a VDI solution in
Correct.
conjunction with
Yeah. So, but otherwise, they can do whatever they want. They can use the the Play Store. They can do whatever they want on the device because it doesn't really matter because they can't get anything in or out of that VM session.
And you're comfortable with the dual profile where they're using that to access whatever it is they will, and then on the other end they can access all their Humana information, and never the twain shall meet.
Exactly. And another, like a sort of a supportive measure of that is that we don't allow the Chromebook devices on our corporate network. Or on our guest network is fine. Our corporate network, none at all. So that's another way in which we sort of make sure that nothing else can, get in or out of our networks.
So talk me through where you kind of see this going in the future. So like we mentioned, this is kind of early in your process. What's the next few stages for you?
So with this philosophy change we had at Humana, we began to say, like, can we not just give these devices to anybody? It wasn't just the kiosks or our public sessions that we wanted to do. Can we just give these to anybody and have them do this work? And so it's like, sure, why not? So we started a pilot. We have roughly 300 Chromebooks deployed at this point. Many of them are in our kiosk situation, but we have a group that are our pilot users, and we piloted the Chromebooks out into our environment for people to use their VM sessions or our webmail or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And the response has been like pretty much astounding. I was mentioning to one of your coworkers just a second ago that for some reason the assistants to our executives are all want to use Chromebooks now, and I need to go back and figure out why that is exactly, but which I don't know. But that has been like our biggest sort of push is I want to use this simple device, and I think a lot of it has to do with you open the lid, it instantly comes on, they log in with their credentials, and it just goes to what they want to do. So
you mentioned logging with their credentials. Talk to me about your Active Directory environment. I know in the early phases where you and I were working together, you were sort of in this position of are we using AD, are we using ADFS, where should we go, and the path forward for you. How do you envision that playing out with your identity management piece, which
right. So we are still in the early stages, right? So we're still using traditional ADFS stuff to do.
This is for all your Macs, for all your Windows devices?
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we're still doing that. As an insurance company, we tiptoe very slowly into
totally
cloud
understand.
stuff, right? So what we're doing now is we're moving more into the O365 realm, which is then going to lead us probably into a cloud AD situation.
So using that implies that you're effectively going to have to use Azure AD for your backend.
At some point, yes. Yeah. So we're maybe dragging and screaming, but yeah, we're going to end up there. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you go forward and as you're implementing these devices, are there other use cases where you're looking at implementing these beyond just the kiosk and beside the network, or where other areas can you envision these things being deployed?
Well, we've also put them in. I guess we're handing them out now, like all over the place. Not just with our AD users, but in other non-kiosk situations. We're very much like what we did to register here at the conference is how we're also using them. And those are kiosks to some degree, but they're not as locked down as the kiosks we're using. So I envision them being anywhere that somebody may want to use a phone type situation. This a Chromebook would be a better option.
What kind of applications are you using? Are you using SaaS applications? Are you using thick client? You mentioned VDI earlier. What are users typically working with on the device?
Anything that they can get to that doesn't need to be on our network to do it. Do you know what I mean? So, our webmail functions are mostly Citrix. We haven't really delved into a lot of the SaaS applications just because it's
Again,
not
you're an
something,
insurance company.
right,
You're
right,
risk averse.
right,
No, I get it.
right. We have a Salesforce presence, but I don't. And then also Workday. So we're those things, and which is actually one of the reasons why we did the last implementation is we had a big Workday situation where some of our end users who did not have AD credentials early on now have AD credentials, and they needed a way to get to their Workday applications, and so Chrome became the option for that.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for A, working with us, and B, I'm glad that your implementation is going so well.